Herstoryans. I'm your host, Heather Ashley, and welcome to another episode of Women of Her Story, a podcast dedicated to celebrating women who have made or are making their mark on our society. Sitting next to me, as always, is your favorite royal, Sir Alistair McPuffinmunch. How are you doing today, Sir Alistair?
Good afternoon, my fair lady. I'm doing just fine. And yourself?
I'm doing really well.
Splendid.
Well, especially since we have another extra special guest for our Remix Main episode. Joining us is the author of the picture book biography, Beatrix Potter, scientist. We have Lindsay Metcalf with us. Hi, Lindsay. Thank you so much for helping us with our herstory lesson today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here among royals.
Thank you. It is appreciated.
Oh, Lord. Most of you know Beatrix Potter as the author of children's books like The Tale of Peter Rabbit. But did you all know that she was so much more than that?
No. Me
and Lindsay knew.
I did some research because of a morning morsel one morning.
Oh, that's right.
One morning, and I kind of got a little bit of information, but I saved the rest of it for now. I'm excited to learn.
I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's get right into it. Beatrix Potter was born on July 28th, 1866, into an upper middle-class family in South Kensington, London, England. A curious lover of nature from a young age, she had numerous small animals as pets: mice, rabbits, a hedgehog, and even some bats along the way. She would sometimes take them with her when they went on long holidays to Perthshire, Scotland.
I hear there's some royalty over there.
So I know a lot of people understood that Beatrix had pets, but what most people don't talk about is that she came from a family interested in Victorian naturalist science, and she and her brother would boil their pets after they died so that they could dissect them and learn their anatomy. They had a cabinet full of mouse skeletons in their nursery, and there was one crazy story where someone bumped the cabinet and the mice skeletons all collapsed, and then she had to put them back together.
Oh no. Oh my gosh. Yeah. That's, in high school, might have been middle school, it was 8th or 9th grade, in science, we dissected owl pellets, so owl droppings, and there would be animal skeletons you could put together an entire little mouse skeleton. So those are, I can't imagine a whole cabinet full. That would be
unique.
Yeah. Well, that's one way to put it.
That's very unique.
But that was how she learned her illustration.
So
if you look at her children's books, all of the animals look really realistic, and it's because she understood anatomy and she would draw animals in all different positions, and it was because of her science.
Yeah, I love that.
It's cool to learn the anatomy so like cool. That.
Yeah,
instead of school, you're just doing that at home.
We'll get into that. You'll see. Beatrix loved landscapes, flora and fauna, and she observed them closely and painted nature as she saw it whenever she could. One year, when at the Dalgais estate, sure, we'll go with that pronunciation, their usual choice for holiday excursions wasn't available. They spent their holiday in the Lake District at Ray Castle near Lake Windermere. Windermere?
It's Windermere.
I'm learning already. Here, she met Hardwick Rawnsley, the vicar of Ray, who was later a founding member and secretary of the National Trust. The National Trust was created to, quote, promote the permanent preservation for the benefit of the nation of lands and tenements, including buildings, of beauty or historic interest. His interests in the countryside and country life inspired Beatrix to keep exploring her own curiosities. At age 14, Beatrix started to keep a diary. This was no ordinary diary, as she wrote it in a code of her own. A simple code of letter-for-letter substitution, but still, I wish I was that cool at age 14.
Absolutely.
Did you write in code at age 14?
No, I couldn't imagine being like a Harriet the Spy kind of like individual at 13. I'm pretty sure I was like watching Regis and Kelly. Like I was not doing anything like remotely cool. I thought that was like really cool. I was like, I wonder who they're gonna have on this week. They get into shenanigans on that show sometimes, I will say. But no.
After having read all 450 pages of this diary, I would say that Beatrix Potter would have watched Regis and Kelly too, because she was kind of gossipy.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I would have watched that with her then. Okay, we would have had some coffee together. That's nice. She sounds okay. Cool.
Her diary served as a sketchbook and a literary experiment. Leslie Linder decoded it in 1958, and Beatrix's tiny handwriting wrote about society, her impressions of art and artists, and she recounted stories and observations of life around her. So she was a bit of a gossip.
A little bit. It's 450 pages, and it covers 1881 to 1897. So if you do math, you figure out how long that is, which I did not read. 15 years, I guess. Did I do that right? I'm a writer, not a mathematician. So to me, what was amazing about it is that she was not famous when she wrote this, and she still had this intense need for privacy where she was creating a code so that no one else would read it.
Yeah.
And she wrote in it not every day, but almost every day, and just about her travels and about how overbearing her mom was. So that's probably why she wrote it in code. And I just loved getting into the weeds of it because it really brought her voice to life. And this Leslie Linder, who decoded it in 1958, it didn't just happen in 1958. It was like he dedicated his life to this.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, that makes sense because that's a whole lot of material to go through.
Yeah, meticulous work.
Yeah. Oh man. And that, I wonder what made them want to I mean, I guess curiosity, and we all want to know what people are thinking. Like everybody wants to read somebody's diary. I mean, I guess not everybody. I don't think you would
maybe
read
at that time
diary.
they were probably like eager, like what like
but
what
I think,
is that?
That I guess the fact that it's coded, that he was like, there's got to be interesting stuff and a more insight into who she was as a person.
Absolutely, that speaks a lot.
Yeah,
because the world knew her as a children's book author, and this was 1958, so she was super famous at the time, and she was also deceased. So she couldn't come after them for spilling her secrets, but she didn't really talk about science that much, and so that's why I loved reading her diary, because it was during her teens and early 20s, and that's when she was really diving into science, and it just gave you a firsthand primary source view of it.
Exactly. Yeah. No better way to see how someone ends up where they ended up than reading a journal. Yeah. Innovative and curious women weren't on vogue at the time. Victorian era women of her class were usually privately educated and rarely went to university. Fortunately, she seems to have been able to gain access to microscopes and the like.
Yeah, she did not attend school as a young woman at all. Her parents were wealthy and they gave her access to education, but as in the form of a governess. So they kind of made a nursery on the top floor of their house in London, and that's where she stayed. Her nanny and her governess basically raised her. Her mom and dad were kind of distant. She was sort of close to her dad, and he nurtured her interest in science, and that he was a photographer, so she would go out on these outings looking closely at nature. And so they did provide her with microscopes, but they sent her brother to school. So there was always this dynamic where, you know, it's pretty clear that she doesn't have the independence that she wants, but there's no way for her to gain that independence because she can't really go out and get a job. So yeah, it's, you know.
It's so frustrating. That's why I said we'll talk about school in a minute, because she didn't have that option. That's why she was, you know, and it's interesting though that her brother did the dissecting and all this curiosity, science-driven stuff with her. Because I feel like, I don't know, a lot of brothers wouldn't be so inclusive with their sisters like that, you know. I think that's pretty special that he did that. I don't know if their dynamic was a close one or not, but
I think they were fairly close. Just from my read of it, there was one story about him going off to school and asking her to take care of his pet bat, and I'm not sure what happened. I can't remember exactly, but at one point she chloroformed it, which is, you know, it was a different time. That's how they really didn't appreciate nature, in that they knew nature needed to survive. They would kill things in order to study them.
Yeah.
So,
whoops.
but that was another example of dissecting that.
Yeah.
And they wrote letters back and forth about articulating the wings, and just super, I love that she was super nerdy.
Yeah. It sounds like it. That's such an interesting dynamic in a household. Probably frustrating for such a curious woman to not be able to do all the things she thought she wanted. Well, not thought she wanted to do. Like, it was provided, but not in the same way. Like, there's a difference between being at school and then being just given a governess. Like, that's not ideal, but good that she was, I guess, given the opportunity to be educated like that.
Yeah.
Beatrix was interested in all forms of natural science except for astronomy. I do wonder if the reason she wasn't as interested in astronomy is because there's a lack of physical dissection, things in detail to look at. You know, when you're studying it, you can look at it, but you can't touch it. You can't look at exactly how it works. So I feel like she needed to touch it, to explore it, to see it, to be fully interested in that branch of science, you know. She collected fossils. She studied archaeological artifacts from London excavations, and entomology, which is the study of insects. She carefully studied, drew, and painted her specimens. In the 1890s, Beatrix zeroed in on mycology, or the study of fungi, completing 350 paintings of various mushrooms and lichen, right? It's lichen or lichen? Lichen or lichen?
Lichens.
I thought so, but I always go to that's like a type of werewolf.
I was thinking, I was like, lichen?
So that's why I second guessed
Fungi?
myself, because I was like, isn't
Okay,
that
now
like...
I'm second guessing, but I always tell this terrible joke to my kids where I'm like, I liken those lichens on that tree. Oh, no.
I bet they love it.
I like that sense of humor.
It was really fun when I did a school visit at their school in front of all their friends, and I told that joke. They were like, that's not my mom.
That is incredible, and I'm gonna use that all the time.
Really funny. Yeah, so funny.
So lichen is a fungi algae hybrid. And at the time, it was thought to be another plant in the Scottish countryside and English Lake District. Linda Lear, author of Beatrix Potter, A Life in Nature, was one of the primary sources for this episode. Shout out to our guest, Lindsay, for pointing me in that direction. And she said this of Beatrix's new obsession with fungi. Beatrix, quote, never saw art and science as mutually exclusive activities. but recorded what she saw in nature primarily to evoke an aesthetic response. Her interests as an artist and a naturalist had converged on fungi. She was drawn to fungi first by their ephemeral fairy qualities, and then by the variety of their shape and color and the challenge they posed to watercolor techniques. Her first known watercolor of a mushroom was painted when she was 20. Now, here comes one of my favorite characters in her life. On one of the fancy family summer holidays to Perthshire, in 1892, Beatrix meets shy Scottish mail carrier, naturalist, and amateur mycologist Charles Mcintosh.
Yes, they were a really strange pair because he had been a postman throughout the years that she was there on holiday with her family. And she first said she saw him at age 4, and she said she was kind of splashing in the puddles that his footsteps would leave behind, but she didn't think he ever noticed her. And then as she starts studying mycology, she is looking for a mentor, and she hears that Charles Mcintosh is an expert in botany and fungi. So she reaches out to him, and they finally have this meeting, which was sort of taboo at the time because men weren't supposed to meet with women, I think indoors at that time, but they did. And she called him a damaged lamppost because he was very shy and he was looking at the floor. But once she started talking about mushrooms and fungi, it opened him up, and she said he just lit up with enthusiasm, and he taught her about scientific illustration techniques and how to classify them by name and all this sort of thing. And they ended up corresponding for years.
Oh, that's so cool. I love that. I love the idea of someone existing around in your hemisphere for like your whole life, and you can get that feeling where you're like, I know of this person and I feel like they're here for a reason, but it hasn't come up yet. And then it turns out that, this is why this person is part of her life, or at least that's where my mind goes, where like he was supposed to be there. It just had to be, they had to figure out why, like where their circles intertwined.
Yeah. And the first children's book she wrote was actually The Tale of Peter Rabbit, and Mr. McGregor looks just like Charles Mcintosh.
Wow. I'm going to go back and check that out.
Yeah. Lear said, quote, Mcintosh not only provided just the right level of expertise and objectivity to allow Beatrix to advance her skills, but he also gave her the professional validation she longed for. The more she studied the fungi under a microscope, the more she sliced them up, the more time she spent studying, the more curious she became. She began creating microscopic drawings of fungus spores. She wanted to learn how the fungi reproduced. But who hasn't wondered that? I bet you wonder that all the time.
Once a day when I
Once
wake
a day.
up.
How do fungi reproduce?
I'm like, brush your teeth. How do they reproduce?
I wonder when my nose starts running. Why are they reproducing in my
Yeah. Why are they reproducing so much right now? What's in the air?
Can't stop
Who's
thinking.
playing the Marvin Gaye right now? Using sample after sample, test after test, in 1895, she developed a theory of their germination. She didn't believe in the theory of symbiosis provided by German mycologist Simon Schwendener. Simon Schwendener. And what a name. What a name that is.
Yeah.
She proposed a more independent process of reproduction.
Yeah, experts today think she got it wrong. Because this is where she's studying lichens, and we now know that they're two separate organisms. It's fungi and algae, or sometimes it's fungi and cyanobacteria. And I am not an expert in this, but I know how to give the 2-second definition. So, but it's not super clear from her diary, which is basically all we have from this time period, but it seems that she thought it was one organism. that it was a hybrid organism, as she called it. And people think that that's what her paper was about, which I believe you're going to talk about coming up.
Yeah. So using her uncle, Sir Henry Enfield Roscoe's connection as a chemist and vice chancellor of the University of London, Beatrix began consulting botanists at Kew Gardens. Steadily becoming more and more confident, she began approaching them with her theories. She was able to convince George Massey of her ability to germinate spores and her theory of hybridization. Beatrix wrote her conclusions and submitted a paper to the Linnean Society in 1897. This openly sexist society barred women from membership, denied them access to the research library, and didn't allow them to attend presentations of scientific papers, even if it was their own paper. So, as Beatrix was a woman, and therefore couldn't attend the proceedings or read her own paper, our buddy George Massey presented the paper. Lear said the following, quote, this is a long quote, so
buckle
up, put on your thinking caps. The general membership of the society met at 7 o'clock on Tuesday evening, the 1st of April, 1897, with President Albert C.L.G. Gunther in the chair. The business of the meeting was the reading of a paper on the germination of the spores of Agaricinae.
In my mind, it's Agaricinae.
There we go. I skipped a syllable. You say it?
Agaricinae?
Yep. By Miss Helen B. Potter. And the presentation of several exhibits by 5 distinguished fellows, including Thistleton Dyer and George Murray. Since women were not allowed to be members or to participate in the meetings, Beatrix was not present. Afterwards, together with any slide drawings as exhibits, it was, quote, laid on the table, where it could be examined. Laid on the table had a specialized meaning in Linnean society, parlance of the time of, quote, received but not seriously considered in open forum. In short, while Beatrix's paper was read at least in part, no substantive notice was given to it. Like other women at the time who attempted to gain a hearing for their scientific research at the Linnean, Beatrix's theories were never seriously considered. She mentions William Thistleton Dyer, which another name. He is a butt-faced miscreant who was the director at Kew Gardens at the time. He dismissed her entirely without looking at her insanely accurate, beautiful renderings of the fungi, and said that her theories were, quote, unimportant mare's nests. And there's no way they could possibly stand up to a subject this profound. I am already flying into a rage, and so I can't imagine the type of grace it requires to say what Beatrix said, which she says that she informed him that it would all be in the books in 10 years.
Yeah.
Grace is how she handled it, because she was talking about hiding behind bushes so she could kind of ambush him and get his attention.
Well, I mean, that's better than
not pay attention to her.
I don't know how these men with that use the random name generators were like in charge of any of this and like really delegating who was going to speak on.
Who are you to say?
Thistle is your name.
I think I emailed you when I was getting into this particular part of my research that I was like having a conniption, because even if her theories are now, thought of as incorrect, she wasn't even given the actual consideration or even just like a ceremonial, at least look at everything and don't dismiss it entirely.
She was germinating these spores, and hardly anyone was doing that at the time. Not even the top scientists in England, which were all working at Kew Gardens. So yeah, they should have paid attention to her, and they eventually did somewhat.
Yeah, sort of. We'll get into that. So in that, we'll get into it right now. In 1997, the Linnean Society issued posthumous
97?
Yeah. In 1997, they issued a posthumous apology for the sexism displayed in handling her research, but like way too little, far too late.
So like we were born, and then they were like, sorry. Like that's
we were born
wild.
and existed for
like
a
we might have
considerable amount
heard
of
this
time.
story, and that like we've heard the story before they apologized.
Yeah, it's just kind of crazy.
Yeah, one of the things that really interested me about her is that she was just someone who was able to pivot, and you know, when she encountered a setback, which this is clearly a huge setback, she just found something else to do and be successful with.
Absolutely.
Which children's books. And then she pivoted again later, which I will get into.
Yeah. According to Lear, we got a lot to get into. According to Lear, quote, there is no evidence that she had any ambition to be recognized by the scientific community as a mycologist, or that she wished for a life devoted to scientific inquiry. Although her watercolors are considered so accurate that modern mycologists refer to them still to identify fungi, which I think is so awesome.
Yeah.
Gorgeous. They're so pretty. I like want to frame them. I want to print them out and frame her illustrations. They're so gorgeous.
They are, and they just look lifelike, and there are so many of them. You said 350. I found between 350 and 450. It's not clear.
Wow.
How many there are.
I lowballed it.
I lowballed it in my book too. She only included a couple of fungi in her children's books, though. I mean, she has dozens of books, but only a couple have little pictures of toadstools in them.
She channeled her genius and creativity in a new direction. And 5 years later, her self-published first edition of The Tale of Peter Rabbit was sold out before the next commercial edition was even printed.
See, I knew that much.
Her lifelike illustrations in all the children's books she wrote captured the attention of London and later the world. I personally think that the style that she painted in is why adults love them too, because it feels like you could step outside and it wouldn't be weird if that little rabbit or squirrel in the park started talking and wore like a smart little outfit. You know, I think that's something that is different than what a lot of people think of as children's illustrated books.
Oh, like Dr. Seuss. Everything is so
It's
farcical and
like
color,
so,
and they're like, oh, the places you'll go, and everything just is like these giant orange like things. And it's
whereas
like,
with Tale of Peter, it's just
wearing, like, a
nice
nice
and calm, and it feels real.
Yeah.
It feels so real.
And in her mind, well, what I love about her is that fusion of the science and the anatomy with the whimsical, because in her mind, I don't think they were really separate. Like, she was studying scientific illustration for all those years, but at the same time, she would take her pet rabbit outside on a leash, and like, she had a visitor that would feed it peppermints, and its teeth ended up like getting cavities and rotting.
Oh no.
So like, she kind of treated them as if they were these they were sentient, but like almost personified them.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I didn't know that about
poor rabbit.
Poor rabbit, but he got delicious peppermints or delicious snacks.
Yeah, he didn't know it was bad.
Yep. I wouldn't recommend
it. Beatrix Potter was one of those women that was born to be outdoors. And in 1905, she bought the Hilltop Farm in near Surrey in the English Lake District. Tenant farmer John Cannon and his family stayed on to manage the farm while she learned the techniques of fell farming and raising pigs, cows, and chickens. With help from a local, William Heelis, Beatrix bought contiguous pasture, and in 1909 she purchased the 20 acres Castle Farm across the road from Hilltop Farm. Purchasing land around the area required a lot of help from one William Heelis, and the two spent significant amounts of time together. He proposed in 1912, and the two married on October 15th, 1913, in London at St. Mary Abbots in Kensington. The two moved to Castle Cottage on Castle Farm that was now up to 34 acres.
Yeah, and she was 47 when she got married. So she had lived this whole life, and William Heelis actually wasn't her first love. She had fallen in love with her editor probably about 10 years before. His name was Norman Warren, and they had this correspondence through letters and fell in love, and he proposed to her, but her parents didn't approve because he was a lowly editor of children's books and not in manufacturing. And then she was planning to marry him anyway, but then he got sick and he died. So she was crushed. Lymphatic leukemia, I think.
Oh no. And that's in a time where they knew hardly anything about that type of illness. So it's just,
it was a shock to her. And then shortly after, she starts publishing children's books. And I don't know if she really had time to grieve, because I don't think she had anyone in her circle who really understood.
You know, I'm so glad that she ended up, I mean, I highly doubt her family approved of this new man, but she's also like, I'm a 47-year-old woman. I will marry who, with my own earnings, like with my own life, I will marry who I want to marry.
That's exactly it, because she first bought Hilltop Farm, and that was her first real expression of independence. She was finally able to get away from her parents, and well into her 20s and maybe even her 30s, she was vacationing with them every summer, and she still felt kind of under their wings, and she wasn't married, and she didn't have another job. So yeah, the children's books really allowed her to have independence.
Yeah. And Beatrix's mentor, Canon Hardwick Rawnsley, we mentioned him way back at the beginning. He was the first secretary and founding member of the National Trust for Places of Historic Interest or Natural Beauty. Beatrix supported the efforts of the Natural Trust to preserve not just extraordinarily beautiful places, but heads of valley and low grazing lands that could be ruined by development. She was considered an authority on traditional lakeland crafts. This is so random to me, and it's so funny. But crafts such as period furniture and stonework. She restored and preserved the farms that she bought or managed, making it a point to have at least one piece of authentic antique furniture in each of the cottages, which is so cool, because not only is she like, all right, we have to consider the fact that it can't just be extraordinarily beautiful land that we preserve. We have to consider pasture and all these things that are so easily going to be ruined, which is so forward thinking. But even today, like people don't even consider these things. And then also
developing the land, and she was like, it's going to be ruined if people put houses and hotels up here. So she started buying it.
But then on the same token, she's like, also, I'm gonna figure out how to restore all these antiques and make it really traditional. You're like, what are we pivoting again? What just happened? Oh my goodness. Shortly after acquiring Hilltop, Beatrix became interested in breeding and raising Herdwick sheep, indigenous fell sheep. Pivot again, I mean, honestly. And in 1923, she bought the Troutbeck Park Farm, a former deer park that she restored with thousands of sheep, making her one of the major Hardwick sheep farmers in the country. She was admired for her willingness to experiment with biological remedies for common sheep diseases. Who isn't? Who's not always thinking about that? By the late 20s, Beatrix and the Hilltop farm manager, Tom Story, made a name for their prize-winning Herdwick flock at local agricultural shows, at which she was often asked to judge.
This is really interesting to me because I grew up on a farm, so I love all these pivots that she's making, but she's not as focused on children's books at the time when she's doing this land preservation and raising these sheep. I mean, she is actually a farmer at this time. And I think late 20s, she kind of gets back into children's books because an American friend from the Horn Book, of all places, comes to visit and says, don't you have anything else you want to publish? And ended up doing some revision of older works and combining them into a chapter book for older readers called Fairy Caravan. And it focused on some of her old pets, but also farm animals. And she said it was a, quote, she used the, quote, homely idiom of our old North Country speech. So at that point, her parents weren't really influencing her anymore, and she didn't have to be proper, and she was embracing her country life, I guess.
I was thinking that this could not be more opposite than the environment she grew up in. And that just goes to show that like everyone is gonna be nothing like you think they're gonna be. And I know that was a weird way to phrase that, but like I'm sure her parents never thought that if they brought her up in Victorian society in this like wealthy way, vacationing in these gorgeous estates, that they would end up with a daughter who buys up all this land and becomes a sheep farmer. Like every doesn't matter who you think you're gonna have. They're gonna be their own person. It's so interesting.
But if you look at her diary, which they couldn't because they couldn't read the code, but she's out when she's younger, like mucking about and like dung, looking for fungi. Yeah. And so she was never afraid to get dirty, and
she's born to be in the that's just like that's where she felt at home. And I'm so glad she was able to actually create that home for herself.
Absolutely.
In 1942, she became the president-elect of Herdwick Sheep Breeders Association.
Doing it all. The
first time a woman had been elected, but she unfortunately died of complications from pneumonia and heart diseases on December 22nd, 1943, before taking office.
That's sad.
I know. That's a bummer, but also like cool, but like big fat bummer because she didn't get to do it. Beatrix left nearly all of her property to the National Trust, amounting to 4,000 acres of land, 16 farms, cottages, herds of cattle, and the Herdwick sheep, enabling the preservation of land that is now included in the Lake District National Park. She also left the National Trust most of her original illustrations. She gave her mycological and scientific drawings to the Armit Museum and Library in Ambleside. A collection of her fungus paintings are showcased at Perth Museum and Art Gallery in Perth, Scotland, which I didn't actually know there was a Perth, Scotland. Yeah. So for a second, when I was initially, I was like, how'd this end up in Australia? Like, what happened?
I've been immersed in Scotland in this research.
So you're like, what do you mean you didn't know there was a Perth, Scotland? I'm like, listen, I'm just thinking Australia here. In 1967, mycologist W.P.K. Findley included many of Potter's accurate fungus drawings in his book, Wayside and Woodland Fungi. It took a little more than the 10 years that she initially predicted when the Linnean Society dropped the ball, but her fungus drawings were finally published in a book. Lear wrote, quote, Beatrix Potter brought nature back into the English imagination with her books and her illustrations. She wrote most of them at a time when nature was viewed as something of little value, when the plunder of nature was more popular than its preservation. After her marriage to William Heelis in 1913, the emphasis of her imaginative work shifted more and more away from literature toward the land and the animals it sustained. Beatrix cared about the old ways and about what was necessary to live simply in nature. Imagination allowed Beatrix Potter to value the natural world and to share the treasures she found in the Lake District and its culture. As a far-sighted businesswoman, she understood that their preservation was inherently linked to the success of fell farming. Beatrix Heelis's stewardship created a singular moment in the recovery of nature in the 20th century, a paradigm of environmental awakening. I just loved all of Lear's writing. Number one, I just magical. Really, just I think the passion behind you could just tell that they're so passionate about getting this story out that like it was just I couldn't put it down. I was like, man, and I clearly just wrote down all these huge quotes because I was like, oh, can I just read the whole book? Can we just can we just read all these things?
Drawing books, but like
yeah, it's amazing.
Huge blue lines under like huge portions of the
under
book.
Like everything, the whole thing, right? I was like sitting through my Kindle. I was like, you can't. I gotta stop highlighting every word. Like I gotta stop doing that. So here's something really cool that I'm surprised I didn't know about. I'm a dancer, mostly ballet, and so I love really off kilter ones. So I can't believe I didn't know about this. In 1971, a ballet film titled The Tales of Beatrix Potter was directed by Reginald Mills, music written by John Lanchberry, choreographed by Frederick Ashton, and performed in character costumes by the Royal Ballet and the Royal Opera House Orchestra. How is that not a bigger thing?
I feel like I should have known that.
Like, I couldn't find it. I wanted to watch it. It's got to be somewhere. It's probably on YouTube. I didn't check YouTube, but
speaking from royalty, I've never heard about it before. So this must be another royal lineage that I'm not familiar with.
No, you're just mad that they didn't ask you to be in it.
Well, now we're here. We crossed that bridge.
Here's another one that surprised and delighted me greatly. Beatrix Potter's 1913 book, The Tale of Pigling Bland, was a childhood favorite of none other than George Orwell. And as it turns out, it was one of the key inspirations for his classic Animal Farm.
Oh.
That was so cool.
You get inspiration from every place, every nook, every cranny. So.
I wonder if it was something where he was like, I bet these animals are having a whole other society that we don't even know about.
Man.
I like how you think.
You know, that's just like such a cool, you just never know who other people are
a fan of.
Yeah, who draw inspiration from other forms that you just wouldn't think. And I don't know, that's just so, and it makes sense now. If you read Animal Farm and then you look at these, you're like, I can see how you would get there from here. I mean, obviously her book is not a political commentary, but I was like,
is it?
Or is it? Or is it? That's something to ponder. What a woman.
And I love it too. And that's what I like about being able to write this children's book about it, because in children's literature, we often look for the happy ending, which this does have a happy ending, but it also shows failure and her willingness to persevere and pivot. And it shows kids and adults who read it that failure is normal and it's even necessary in order to reach our goals.
Yeah.
So.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And I want to leave you all with this quote. Imagination is the precursor to policy, the precondition to action. Imagination, like wonder, allows us to value something.
Really good.
Got chills. I got chills when I read it, chills when I wrote it, chills when I said it.
I agree.
Like,
I agree
you
with
know,
all of it.
that couldn't be a more poignant and
truer point.
necessary thing to have, little nugget in our brains, especially right now, which is being like, it is, imagination needs to be nurtured and fostered, and even into adulthood. I think so many times we're told to stop playing, stop imagining, stop existing in a world that doesn't exist. It's like, why though? Like, you can still have an imagination, and I think the people with the best imaginations are the ones that are creating and living lives that are benefiting not just themselves but others.
Absolutely. And especially right now during the pandemic, I mean, can you imagine not having imagination? I just used imagine twice in one word, but like, you know, we need art to get through this time. And if we can make our own way, even better.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us for this, Lindsay. Can you tell us where we can find your book, where we can find you, all that good stuff?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. That was really fun. I have a website. It's lindsyhmetcalf.com. And I have 3 children's books coming out this fall. So Beatrix Potter, Scientist, came out first. That was September 1st from Albert Whitman.
So recently. Congratulations.
Yeah, it's
I keep forgetting to say that. Big congrats.
It's illustrated by Junie Wu, and the second book just came out. I don't even know what today is, but it came out like a week ago. No Voice Too Small, 14 Young Americans Making History, and it's a poetry anthology about young activists that are contemporary and making change right now. And then the third one is called Farmers Unite, Planting a Protest for Fair Prices. And that's illustrated with archival photographs, and also seems to be a pivot if you look at my own portfolio. But to me, the 3 are tied together with empowerment and activism and a willingness to get yours, you know, like go after whatever it is you need. So
amazing. Really cool. I love it. And you're on social media, correct?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Lindsay H. Metcalf.
Easy.
And any of the books are available wherever books are sold.
Amazing. Great. I love that. There, it looks great. In the digital version, I'm sure it looks gorgeous. Also in like physical copy, but it looks so nice.
Thank you. And I love that they let me write this book, because there are already many biographies of Beatrix Potter, but nobody had done one about her science. And so this covers her from young childhood through the time when she writes The Tale of Peter Rabbit. So if you know other things about her and you've read other books about her, you still may not know what's in this book.
So check it out, everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so good. Thank you, historians, for tuning in again. Subscribe, rate, review, tell your friends, you know, all of that. Come back this Friday for an interview with producer, writer, director, and assistant editor-in-chief of Ms. in the Biz, Laura Hunter Drago. In this interview, she talks about her feature film, To the New Girl, questioning herself, finding a support system, and so much more. If you want to follow us on social media, you can find us on Twitter at
The Her Story Pod,
Instagram,
at Women of Her Story Podcast,
and go on and visit our website at
ofherstory.com.
Be safe, stay healthy, and show the world what you're made of.
Wear a mask. Bye.
Wear a mask.